Hey, it's Gene from the Assisted Living Network. We're losing our seniors one senior at a time. And I don't just mean physically, we're all going to pass away, we're all going to go on, but their history, what's in their mind, in their head, their thoughts, their heart. I had a friend come over just the other night and he was sharing a story about his grandmother. And somebody had told him something and said, hey, I heard that you have some Native American in your background. And he said, I didn't know that. And he asked his grandmother and she said, where did you hear that? And she was distraught because way back when that was in their family bloodline, that was something they didn't want to embrace, something they weren't proud of. But he never would have known unless somebody had brought it up. So when he asked Grandma, she finally broke down and told him the history. If he had not had that experience, they would have lost that history. Grandma's still here, someday she won't be, but that experience, that history of where we come from and who's before us, one senior at a time. In residential assisted living homes, I've had the privilege of spending some time with some of the residents there in my own homes that I own and operate. And in those homes, when I walk in, if I've got some time, I'll have a seat. And I remember distinctly a gentleman, I went into his room and there was a picture frame. And there was just a series of pictures that would kind of come and go every 10 seconds. And I remember walking into the room and saying, you know, what are these pictures? And we sat down for an hour and he shared with me about what he saw, what he did, where he was and who he was with, the stories that he had and the adventures that he went through. And all I could do is to think to myself, I had the privilege of spending an hour with this man, hearing about these life stories, and I was wondering how many of their kids have even heard those stories? How many of his grandchildren had ever heard those stories? And I know at some point those kids will look forward, they're going to look backwards, they're going to say, what about Grandpa? Where was he? What did he do? Who was he? And there's not going to be anybody there to tell them that story. One of the things we do in assisted living is we record that history. We have those conversations with those seniors. It could be on audio, it could be on video, to have them explain where they were, how did they meet their spouse, what languages do they speak, where did they go on missions? I've had residents tell me about mission trips in Africa when Africa was completely different than it is today. That just going there didn't mean you're in a car at all. It was just a completely different world. It's kind of like when you and I watch something like Titanic and think about those people back then, what they wore and what they did and what they thought. Imagine talking to somebody of that age, that group, where you can have the conversation about what were you doing and thinking. What happened during the Great Depression? What was going on in the street? What was going on in the home? That history is being lost, but being able to record it and preserve it and give it to the kids can be life-changing for them, something so valuable for them. But number one, I want to encourage you to have those conversations with people in your life. And I know they're kind of grumpy and old sometimes. They have the grumpy old man syndrome. I get that from time to time. But have the conversation. Sit down, pull out a beer, sit up a fire, light a cigar, do whatever it is where you can have that conversation and just open it up and say, you know, I never heard the story about how you met Mom or Grandma. I never knew about your brother, my Uncle Bob. Why don't you tell me about that? And before you know it, they're starting to dig in. And ask them, here's a great one, about the music. What kind of music did you listen to? And how did you listen to it? You're going to find out that some of them used to dance up a storm. You know, you think you ravers out there dancing 24/7, you got it all down. No, man, they've been doing it for a long time in zoot suits and all kinds of things you never even heard of before. And if they show you a picture, well, that's bonus time right there. Because that picture will speak 1,000 words, but watch the smile come on their face as they describe to you the stories. I had somebody recently share with me about an adventure they had when they were a teenager, and their spouse didn't even know. Their spouse didn't even know, and they're in their 70s, and they're sharing this story, and I could see the twinkle in their eye about this adventure they had, a little mischievousness, and the spouse didn't even know, and it was so enlightening for them as well as for me. And all I could think, if I didn't ask the question, that may never have come out. Their spouse wouldn't have even known, let alone their kids or grandkids even known. What's in your history? What's in your background? And what's in the resident's background when they move into your home? You know, there's some services right now, some technology that we're bringing into the house to preserve that kind of history, where they can actually record short videos and send that to their kids, and those things are recorded and kept. They can record audio and send that, or put it on Facebook, or otherwise preserve it. So at the end, when they do pass away, you can hand them a thumb drive and just say, here it is, some of the history of Mom or Dad, Grandma or Grandpa. Old pictures. May I suggest, just like we did before Grandma passes away, before she's not able to think it through, have her identify the people in the pictures. How many times have you looked at an old picture and say, wow, these are really cool looking people in a cool looking scene, but I have no clue who they are, or you know who one of the people is in the picture. And the only person that can identify that is that one person that you know. Ask them now before it's gone. Because once it's gone, it is truly gone. And I also encourage you, by the way, to preserve that history that you have on film, VHS videotape, and transfer it into a digital format. I did that a couple of years ago for my kids so that it was all transferred. All of the 8mm films from my father from way back when, all the way through 16mm films to VHS to DAT recording, digital audio tape, to cassette tapes, to all kinds of things that were recorded, and we transferred it into a digital format so I could hand it to them on a thumb drive. It was actually on a hard drive that we gave each one of the kids. That was the gift that year. Hey, that was money well spent. It took more time than I thought it would take, but it was well worth it because that history is preserved forever. We're losing our seniors one at a time. Not them physically, but their history. Do you want to preserve it? Are you even curious what mom and dad or grandma or grandpa went through? I guarantee you the futures that come behind you will be, so you should ask those questions now. This is Gene from the Assisted Living Network saying do good and do well. If you like what you've seen and heard, please subscribe.